Alright, guys, so Unit 5 is about using sources, quoting, paraphrasing, and most importantly, about avoiding plagiarism. Now, simply the unit's objectives are to show you the role of sources in an essay. Why do you need sources? When is enough? What is enough? What happens when you overuse sources? And then it shows you how and why you should use quotes. And in doing so, it trains you how to use short quotes and long quotes. And of course, whenever you use any sort of quote, there's a specific in style and bibliography in which you need to source the quotes that you used. We're going to introduce you to two types today: the MLA and the Harvard in style in text citation. Don't worry, we're going to take a look at every single part I just talked about right now. Then we're going to show you how and why you should paraphrase, and simply to train you as a student how to recognize and avoid plagiarism. So, guys, just full disclosure before we get started, um, basically the specifics or the structure of a short quote and a long quote, like for example, where does the comma go, where does the full stop go, so on and so forth. These basic things, I think I'm not going to go over them. I think you should actually read the unit, and it's not that it's not important, but these are very important specifics that you need for your writing. So it's not something that I'm going to test you on. I'm not going to ask you, for example, in a short quote, can you put a comma? No, but it will be you will be tested on it when you're writing your essay, for example. How you structure a long quote, how you structure a short quote in your writing as opposed to an actual question. The other thing you should know is that MLA and Harvard are in text citation formats, and there are actually many different. There's Chicago, there's Turbine, there's many different types. Now, MLA and Harvard are useful for the humanities. Humanities mean literature is a part of humanities. Again, those two you should read from the book because honestly, we don't have time to go. Not that we don't have time, this is something that you should basically understand and not really memorize. You know, it comes with practice, but you also should keep in mind the difference between the two, how to structure MLA as opposed to Harvard and so forth. So as with everything else, I recommend that you go back to the book, and as we go through the lecture, I'm actually going to refer you to the page numbers that I think are very important. That said, you should still read the unit. Alright, so let's get started to the role of sources. Alright, so very simply, why do you need sources? Right? So, if you're writing a personal opinion piece, or if you're writing a piece for an opinion piece in a newspaper, so on and so forth, it has to do with your own opinion or your own story. So in that case, you don't really need sources. But there are times in academic writing, say you're writing a research paper, for example, or you're trying to get to convince the reader or your professor on a specific stance, or you're trying to convince them or of your position. In this case, and especially in academic writing, remember, guys, academic writing is the writing there that's for the university or beyond, like for research, for your work, so on and so forth. It's an important aspect of it to be able to source, right? And a big part of academic writing is sourcing information, using sources, using them properly. So you also need it to support your ideas and arguments. Because if you don't do that, guys, that's not really academic writing. If you don't produce sources, it's really an opinion piece, right? You need to support your argument, and the only way to do that is to bring in sources. Alright, guys, so close reading and implicit meanings and explicit meanings is actually a part of this unit, and although unrelated to sources, not completely unrelated, but it's something that you do on a daily basis in literature classes, and it's not only specific to sources or when they ask you to analyze one source. So, for example, in literary classes, here, for example, at AOU or in any literature class, right? If you're studying a specific book or if you're studying a specific poem, they ask you to analyze the source, right? And what we do in this class and what you haven't realized that we've been doing is we've been doing something called the close reading. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but I have spoken about this before. So, whenever you read for pleasure or whenever you read for fun, right? If you're reading a news article, a magazine article, or you're simply reading a book that you find interesting, right? This is called reading for pleasure. That means that you read without really concentrating so much on the literature itself, on the words, on the vocabulary, on the imagery, on the themes. You don't really concentrate and try to figure these things out. They just come to you later, or they don't. That's okay. In a close reading, this is the reading that we do when it comes to academic sources, right? Or when we need to analyze an academic source, such as a book, such as Jack and the Beanstalk, such as To Build a Fire, right? These are readings that the university asks us to read as part of the course. So what we do is, instead of simply reading for fun, we actually try to analyze and pay attention to details on several levels. So basically, instead of simply reading and just letting it go, no, we take a look. Oh, wait a minute, what does this word mean? Who is this character? What does he look like? What is he trying to do? What is he saying? Right? All of these questions that we've looked at over and over, these discussion questions, right? The happy ending, is it a sad ending? Is he a dynamic character? Right? How does the tone of the book read? These are all questions that you ask yourself when you are doing a close reading of an academic source. Now, there's two different ways, right? When you basically analyze at a different level. There's the explicit meaning that comes from the literature, and there's the implicit meaning, guys, over here. The explicit and the implicit. So, explicit means everything that's external, everything that's outside, right? So, the words that are in a book, right, that you actually read, Jack went up the hill, or, well, to fetch a pail of water, or Jack climbed the beanstalk. This is an explicit meaning, all right? But what is not being said, all right? What is not being said, but you kind of figure it out as a reader, this is the implicit meaning. It's not so easy to figure out. Like, for example, in To Build a Fire, right? So, if they say that it's cold and that there's snow and the man is basically walking in the snow and so on and so forth. But from the tone, from the very beginning, you pick out words like cold, like gloomy, like dark, right? It doesn't tell you that this is going to be a very sad ending, or, well, depending on how you see it, but a very, dark ending, that it's going to be a very cold story, or not cold as in actually cold, but like heartless in a sense. This is all something that you pick up as a reader because you are doing a close reading. This picking up of information, this is called the implicit. Alright? So, guys, please make sure you know the difference between explicit and implicit, and that you understand what a close reading is, and you make sure that you actually know how to do it. Now, so far, we've been doing this since we started, from the very first class. Alright? But before you start any close reading of a text, you first need to make sure that you actually understand the text, and this is the most important. Alright, guys, so back to sources. Usually, what happens is when we ask for sources, right? I ask for 3 sources. Alright, great. And then I get papers, and I would say more than half of the writing is sources, right? So instead of a long quote, right, the long quote is usually a page long. Guys, this is called an overuse of sources, and you should not overuse them. You should not include so much, because what happens is the words of others that you use will take over your ideas, and they will overpower your ideas. So instead of reading your ideas, that I will be reading their ideas that you have included. All right? The point of sources is to enhance your work, to show your work and add to it, not to basically overpower it and take over. All right, guys? And the thing is that you can't only just put a source and that's it, include it, right? When you include a source, you have to analyze it, you have to discuss it, because that shows me that you have understood the source that you have inputted into your paper. So, for example, right, let's go back to the idea of traffic in Kuwait, right? You can see like Kuwait has a huge problematic traffic problem, especially in Ramadan. 90%, according to the Ministry of, oh my goodness, I'm very bad at this. According to the Ministry of Traffic Control in Kuwait, 90% of accidents happen during the month of Ramadan. Full stop. Alright? And then that's it. You're done. That's wrong, guys. You need to explain. Why did you add this source? Alright? According to the Ministry of Traffic Regulation, or so on and so forth, 90% of accidents happen in Ramadan. Full stop. And then you input the source from the Ministry of Traffic, www.kuwaitministry, so on and so forth.com, close it. Right? And then once you're done, you've inputted the source, you've inputted the citation, then what you do is you explain it. All right? That means that people that come back, they're usually very hungry, they usually want to come home because it's futur time, and that's when they overspeed. Another reason is everybody has not eaten for the whole day. So they become very cranky and very angry. And nobody really cares about everybody else when they're hungry. When they're hungry, oh my goodness, when they're hungry or hungry. Hungry and angry. Alright, guys? Explain the source that you've inputted into the paper. Alright, guys, and finally, take a look at the very end. There's something called an annotated bibliography. Alright? So when you write sources, right? When you write about a certain topic, alright? And you simply, when you include other sources, right? And when you simply say, or this person said this and this and this about traffic, and this specialist said this and this and this about traffic, and the third specialist said this and this and this about traffic. What you are doing is you are doing a literature review. You're not writing an essay. Alright? Simply a literature review is an outline of a certain topic, and it points out the strengths and weaknesses. It's the ideas of others input together in the same paper. It's not your ideas, right? So this is a literature review. It's not an essay or a research paper. In a research paper or an essay, you input your own ideas. Now let's move to annotated bibliography. Annotated bibliography is simply a bibliography of sources that includes a summary of the strengths and weaknesses of each source. So it's a literature review is a short format, and annotated bibliography goes on for pages and pages and pages long. Right? This is not really that important. We're not going to take a look of example, and we're not going to take a look at examples, but you should know the definition of it. Alright, guys. So, and when you summarize sources, what you should do is you should include only enough so that the reader understands what you are quoting or paraphrasing. Alright? So this goes back to overusing sources. You should know as a writer how much is too much. Alright? Now, when you summarize, alright, say you have a 50-page report on traffic in Kuwait. You do not include the 50-page report, or you do not include two pages when it's a 5-paragraph essay. What you do is you only select what you think is important for the argument that you have made. Alright, guys? And when you do so, when you are paraphrasing a source or when you are summarizing a source, alright, explain why you have included the source. This goes back to literature review and annotated bibliography. If you do not explain how this source relates to your paper, or if you do not explain why this source is useful, you are simply writing a literature review or in an annotated bibliography. Alright, guys, so please make sure that you really link your ideas to any sources that you use. Excuse me. All right. So in regards to quotations, so as we went back to quoting, is you're repeating the exact word that someone else has written. All right. So when do you quote? You quote when you have taken exactly the same words, right? So an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. All right. This is not your wording. All right. This is Gandhi's wordings. So you are borrowing these sources for your essay. So you need to quote them. Take a look over here. There's something called a double quotation quote. Excuse me, guys. It's over here. There we go. There's a double quotation mark and there's a singular quotation mark, right? So what you do is, for example, an eye for an eye. All right? You include the quotation at the very beginning and then you include the quotation at the very end. Why is this important? Because it tells the reader, the person who is reading your paper, that the quote, this wording is not yours, that it has started from here and it ends over here. Alright, guys? Now, it does not matter if you use double, these two, right? Or if you use single, over here. 1, 1, or 2, 2. But as long as you remain consistent, that means that it is the same throughout your whole essay. If at the very beginning you start to use double, that means you use double for the complete essay. You don't alternate between double and single and double and single. There are times where you use specifically single and there are times where you use specifically double, but you do not need to know about this at this point. Alright, guys, so when should you quote? Just letting you know right now that when I say quote, I don't actually say that, mean that it only has to be something that someone famous said. No, a quote is any wording, exact wording that you use that is not yours. Well, even if it's taken from a website, even if it's taken from a book, anything or any wording that you use that is not your own, you should source, right? And the same goes for paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is when you summarize what is being said or summarize an idea that is being said and it's not your own idea, you should still cite the source. But going back to when you should quote. So, when are times when you need to prove your point and support your ideas, but your ideas or proving your point is not enough. You need to bring in outside sources, right? So this is one way that you could basically bring in outside sources is you bring in quotes from, say, for example, professionals in the field. So if you're talking about traffic, maybe reports on traffic in Kuwait, maybe professionals or researchers on this topic, right? So this type of information is useful to support your own ideas. Of course, there are times when even paraphrasing, which is rewriting another person's idea in your own words, is not enough or will not work. No, that's not enough. Why? Because sometimes the quote is just, you think it's just too important that paraphrasing it or you rewriting it in your own words will not be as effective. At that time, it's actually better to quote than to paraphrase. Like when the quote is so familiar to the public, for example, or if you paraphrase it and paraphrasing it will weaken what is trying to be said, and this is especially for proverbs or popular quotes, then you shouldn't actually paraphrase. You could actually include the source itself. So we're going to go through using short quotes and using long quotes. Again, I'm going to refer you to the specific pages that this information is taken from, and you can actually read it for yourself. I think it would be more effective. But let's go through simplistic rules. All right? So when you use short quotes, right? When I say short quotes, that means a quote can be a single word, but it cannot be longer than 3 lines of text. Now, a rule of thumb, if your quote, right, or the wording that you are taking from somewhere else exceeds 40 words, right, it's no longer a short quote, it's a long quote now, right? Now, rules of thumbs or basic rules to keep in mind when you are quoting. All quotes must be included within a full sentence. So, for example, let's go back to an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. You cannot just say, and Gandhi said an eye, full stop, right? That's not a full sentence. And Gandhi said, no. And we can all remember Gandhi's famous words, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Full stop. That's a full sentence. But this is a bit problematic. Why? Because I didn't explain why I used it. Alright? And we all know what Gandhi said about revenge and how useless it is. In his famous quote, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Full stop. That's a full sentence, guys. All right? You've explained your quote very short in a very short format. All right? It's simplistic, but it's within a full sentence. All right? Now, usually once you quote, all right, once you take an actual quote or statistic or something of that sort, it must be cited immediately after quote. All right, guys. Once you cite, all right, this is you use different types of citations, either MLA or Harvard, but we're gonna go through that right now. Once you are writing your essay, you have a full essay, for example, all right, and you are including sources within the essay, all right. Once you include sources within an essay, you have to include the citation or the sources. Once you include them in an essay, this is called in-text citation because you are using the citation and including it within the text. Alright, guys? Alright, guys, take a look over here. Alright, so you have an essay, and this is within the essay where there is the red arrows right here. So you're writing the essay. This has been paraphrased information. Take a look at this that's highlighted in light yellow. Copsell, 2006. Alright, and then continues on with the essay, writes a few sentences. Having key allies who will communicate the proposal changes to the members is critical for success of this project. Mallory and Thomas, 2003. Full stop. These two are called in-text citations. They are a part of an essay, right? A part of that main text of paper. So usually what we do and basic level writing is we don't include in-text citations. I see a lot of papers, a lot of students, what they do is basically they write everything out and then towards the very end, right, they include the sources that they took the information from. This is wrong, guys. Why is it wrong? Because I have no way as a reader of knowing what part of the essay is your information and what part of it you took the sources from, right? So you need to start learning how to text, to source and text in text. Oh my goodness, I apologize. You need to learn how to source in text and not put it up to the very end. Keeping the sources to the very end is called referencing or works cited or bibliography. That part over here, all right, this is towards the very end of your paper, all right, and it gives me all the information relating to the sources that you took. But I need to know specifically, for example, which part of your writing or which part of your paper is not your own ideas. So while you are writing and you include a source to help support your idea, you need to include it in text. Let's go back. All right. So these are specific rules. All right. But there's much more detailed rules actually in your book. So please refer to page 62 in your text. All right. It teaches you about the structure, commas, how to place them, where to place full stops, how should you start or end a short quote. Guys, it's not that you need to memorize this. This is more practice. You need to be able to understand how to write a short quote and how to write a long quote. Now, even I myself forget sometimes, right, the structure. And I sometimes forget how to do Harvard citation. But I simply go back online and just refresh my memory, and it's okay. Now, using long quotes. Long quotes are also called block quotes. All right. Now, A favorite of students, and I did it as well actually, as basically I used long quotes when I had, say, a 10,000 word essay, right? And it was just too long. So I would use long quotes because I knew it took up a significant amount of words per paper. But at an academic level, such as ourselves, undergraduate level, you should not be using long quotes a lot or exceedingly. All right. So at times it's better to summarize or to paraphrase or use short quotes because it's more detail, not only detailed, but it's more specific and to the point, and it results in a better written paper. All right. But one quote is fine if you really cannot summarize it, or if you really cannot um, find a way to paraphrase it, or you really need to include it. It's fine, but at this level, one long quote is all that's needed. Again, as I said before, a long quote is one in which 40 words is 40 words or more. So a one word to 40 words is a short quote. 40 words plus is a long quote. And guys, when I say a long quote, I wouldn't say write a full page of a long quote. No, all right? Be specific and edit your work. Alright guys, it takes more than 3 lines of typed text. It must be indented on the left hand side by a colon and doesn't start with a quotation mark. So guys, remember these? Yep, these are the quotation marks, right? Remember the double and then you have the single over here. When we are writing a short quote, we include them. When we are writing a long quote, we do not include them in the paper. So take a look over here, right? Douglas is particularly blunt in his assessment of Christian behavior in the South. Take a look. Over here, there's 2 dots, right? And then it's indented. There's a space over here. There's a space for the whole quote. So there's no quotation marks. There's nothing to start it, nothing to end it. But you know that this is a quote because it's not within the same level of the written text. It's all indented to the left, and there's 2 dots, right? That tell you that this is the beginning of the quote. So this is the quote, all right, and then you add the page number. All right, this is the citation over here. All right, guys, going back to it. So there's 3 lines of typed text, more than that. It's indented on the left hand side, which is exactly what you just saw over here, and is introduced by colon, which is the 2 dots that you saw. And it does not start with a quotation mark. Again, I recommend that you refer to page 64 for the structure of a long quote, all right? And practice using long quotes and short quotes because you will be using them from now on for for whenever you need to source information in relation to literature. Alright guys, another thing is that when you add or omit words in quotations, right? So adding is when you add a word or two. For example, say the quote is in the past and you are writing in the present. So you want to add something to it. Add ing, for example, to make it grammatically correct. Or if you want to remove some parts of the quote because you don't need that much, you need just a little. Alright? So you add or omit, which means remove, is to make the writing flow a bit better. Flow, which means basically read easier. Now, when you omit part of your original quote, you note this 3 full stops in place of what you have omitted. It's called an ellipsis, which simply means this: dot dot dot. This 3 dots over here means that you have removed some information in the quotes itself. Now this can be put in brackets. I'm sorry guys. This can be put in the square brackets, right? Simply tells the reader that you have removed a part of the quote. All right. Now if you need to add or change in a quote, you can also add or change a quote within the brackets itself. For example, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. This is the original quote. So I'm going to say an eye and then I'm gonna add and an ear, right? An eye for an eye, and then let's move on. It's the continuation. An eye for an eye. I want to say an eye and an ear. All right. Take a look. For an eye. Okay, it's not the most correct quote, but it's an example. So just work with it, guys. All right. So the original quote is an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. When I add the two brackets over here to open and close, that tells the reader that this part is my own. I have added this to the actual original quote. Now, this is when you want to add. Again, let's go back to once you want to remove. So, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. This is the original quote. I want to remove a part of it. So, an eye, let's say, makes the whole world blind. All right, I want to remove for an eye. So what I do is I delete it. I open the bracket and then I add 3 dots called the ellipsis, close the bracket, and that's it. That tells the reader that there is another part of the quote that has been removed. All right, guys? Easy so far? Okay, let's move on. All right, so back to the citation styles. Now, there are different types of styles. Go back to this. All right, take a look at the 53, for example, or FD 38 over here, FD 32. All right, guys, 31, 29. These are all in-text citations. Baker 170 over here. In-text citation, again, is citation that you use within the essay itself. So there are different styles. There's Turbine, there's Chicago, there's MLA, there's Harvard, there's many different styles. Now, for literature, I would recommend MLA or Harvard, and that's what the book recommends as well because it's the most useful in humanities, right? And there's 2 different formats, and it's very easy to separate the two. The MLA uses an in-text citation and a works cited page, but what it says is that take a look over here. You tell the reader who the author is, and then you include the page number, right? So that's it. For MLA, you use the author and the page number when you want to include the text and the citation inside the text. The Harvard, as opposed to the MLA, is called the author date system. So in the MLA, you only include the last name of the author, and then you include the page number in which you took the quote. But in Harvard, you include the date in which the book was written or whatever book that you're using is. So, for example, Firth was the author, and he published his book in 1957, was the first to argue that language must be interpreted in its context situation. So that's it. Between the two, all right, know that the MLA, all right, is the last name, and then it's the page number. This is in text. Again, the Harvard is the author date, which means you need the author, the date, right, and the page number. But we're going to go through that in a bit. All right, guys? Now, for MLA, as with Harvard, there's also a works cited page over here. All right, the works cited page is basically towards the very end, the pages that you include towards the very end of your writing. Take a look over here. This is usually what I get from everyone, right? Towards the very end, the sources that you used in your writing. And that's great, and that should be included. But again, there's a certain way to do it, right? So for example, in the MLA, it's the last name of the author, the first name, the title of the book, the place of publication, the publisher, and the year of publication. Take a look over here at the punctuation. There's a comma, there's a full stop, another full stop after the title of the book. The place of publication, say it's in New York. In New York, all right, so you put the 2 dots. After where in New York, who's the publisher? The publisher is Graham and Greene. All right, so comma, year of publication is 2003, full stop. Alright? And guys, this is only for a book. It differs. The work cited towards the very end, over here, alright, differs from book to online sources, to interviews, to chapters of a book. So I would really, really recommend you refer to pages 65 to 68 in your book to go through each and every single one. Now, I find it very hard to believe, alright, that you are expected to know every single aspect of it, because I also have to go back to refer to them because I also forget. Alright? This is not something that you should simply memorize. Do not memorize it. Understand it. Alright? Practice it if you need to. But it's not specific to memory. This is not something that you must know. Alright? You should know it. Alright? But only when you need to use it. Alright, guys, so in relation to paraphrasing, alright, what does it mean? Again, it's a third way to use a source in an essay, but you are using the information or the quote and you are putting it in your own words as opposed to actually taking it and including it. But again, whenever you use information or ideas that are not your own, alright, you should still include the sources, alright, because it is not your idea. Other than that, when you are paraphrasing, say for example you have a quote, right? A very important quote that you want to include to support your paper. You do not summarize that quote, right? If it's 3 lines long, you paraphrase it in 3 lines long. Paraphrasing is simply telling what is being said by that specific person in your own words, maybe in a simpler way. That's it. It does not mean summary, guys. Alright? So, in order to paraphrase correctly, you actually need to understand what that other person is saying. Alright? Because if you don't understand what they're saying, you're not going to be able to summarize it properly. Alright, guys? And note as well. So, if you have a quote, changing a few words and just inputting it as it is not paraphrasing the passage. That's essentially plagiarism, guys. Alright? When I paraphrase or when you paraphrase, you need to put it in your own words. Not one word or not 2 words, the whole thing. The whole quote should be in your own words. Alright, so let's take a look at this example of paraphrasing. There are more than 1,000 bicycling deaths each year. Excuse the language, guys. 3/4 are caused by head injuries. Half of those killed are school-age children. One study concluded that wearing a bike helmet can reduce the risk of head injury by 85%. In an accident, a bike helmet absorbs the shock and cushions of the head. From bike helmet, unused lifesavers, that's the source. So what would be an acceptable paraphrase of the above passage? Take a look. The use of a helmet is the key to reducing bicycling fatalities, which are due to risk injuries 75% of the time. By cushioning the head upon impact, a helmet can reduce accidental injury by as much as 85%, saving the lives of hundreds of victims annually, half of whom are school children. Bike helmets, page 348. Alright, guys, look at it's the same thing essentially. It's just worded differently. That's it. That's all you need to know, guys. Alright? So in paraphrasing, you're not removing maybe a few words here and there, or maybe changing children to teenagers, right? You simply are rewriting the whole thing in your own way. Alright, guys, and finally we go to basically the biggest, most important aspect of this unit. Well, I think it is plagiarism and how you should avoid it. So by now, I'm sure you all know that plagiarism is work that is not your own. And not only that, you're not indicating this to the reader. You're not acknowledging your sources. You're not telling the reader that you took this source from so or so on and so forth. So it's essentially stealing intellectual property, and that's not okay. Now, We think that when we say plagiarism or stealing someone else's idea, it's simply taking his work and giving it to me or giving it to another person and saying that's your own work. That's not it. That's only one part of plagiarism. There are many different ways that you can plagiarize. So for example, if you take a sentence that is not your own from the internet and include it as part of your writing, all right, and you don't say that I got this from so on and so forth, that's plagiarism. If you take, say, different phrases or different sentences from four different sources online and then you add them together and make a beautiful little paragraph, right? That's plagiarism, guys. It's not your writing. If you take a word from word directly from a text, that's plagiarism. If you download information or text from the internet, that's information. That's actually plagiarism. Now, and this is important, guys, when you submit a work that has been done by someone else. Now, not only done in this case, I also say when people have helped you submit your work, and this is important for the TMA, all right? You have basically used someone else's work because help here apparently means that someone mostly writes it for you, all right? And I hope that's not the case in my class at least. All right, guys? So please try to do this on your own. Try to write on your own, even the TMA on your own. It's better to get a grade that you deserve, that's fair, as opposed to getting a 0 if you plagiarize. Alright, guys? And take a look at the very end. Paying for work from other sources and submitting it at your own as your own. Guys, you should know that tutors, especially tutors that have been teaching you for quite a bit and have samples of your work and your capacity and your language level, we know, alright, your capabilities. So if you hand me a beautifully done essay and I feel that I know this is not your writing or your level, and if I sit with you and I ask you about it and you have no idea what I'm talking about, that's an immediate 0. Because again, it's plagiarizing. You're paying someone for your work, and it's not even your work, it's their work. Alright, guys, that's all you need to know about plagiarism. Again, with every unit, you're rounding up. Please look at new terms on concept on page 71 and 72. Ladies and gentlemen, please, for this unit especially, it's a lot of information and a lot of information that can be useful to you as you move up in your literature courses, inshallah. So please read it once, twice, even 3 times if you have to. All right, grasp the material because it will be useful to you in every single class that relates to writing essays. Alright, guys, thank you very much and see you all very soon. Take care.